ready to go into more Baconian stuff. This is Bacon's promise, so a lot of the notes in this just happen to find their way into the Shakespeare plays. For instance, this note, all dogs bark at him. Well, this is similar to a line in Henry VI, Part 3. As a bear encompassed round with dogs, who having pinched a few and made them cry, the rest stand all aloof and bark at him. Then in Richard III, it also says the dogs bark at me as I halt by them. Kind of telling that the animals know the truth. Then Bacon's note says, you have him on the hip. Merchant of Venison says, now infidel, I have thee on the hip. And then I have Michael Cassio on the hip in Othello. Bacon's note, 'tis merry in hall when beards wag all. And then in Henry IV, it says, be merry when beards wag all, right here. Bacon says, a good tale is marred in the telling. King Lear, I can mar a curious tale in the telling. I mean, these are identical concepts, okay? This one is merry as a cricket, both used, Henry IV in Bacon's notes. Bacon's notes, of course, this common thing, 9 lives like a cat. And in Romeo and Juliet, Mercutio talks to Tybalt, saying, King of cats, nothing but one of thy 9 lives. Okay? This concept, a little pot is soon hot, is in Taming of the Shrew. Now were I not a little pot and soon hot, my very lips might freeze to my teeth. Wake not a sleeping wolf, it's evil to wake. It's evil waking a sleeping dog. Soon ripe, soon rotten. In King Richard, it says the ripest fruit soon falls, and so doth he. Bacon's note says a good mouse hunt, and Lady Capulet in Romeo and Juliet talks about a good mouse hunt. Okay? Rhyme without reason and reason without rhyme, like in Coriolanus, I can't remember or Comedy of Errors, sorry. Neither rhyme nor reason. And in Merchant of Venice, the Merry Wives of Windsor, in the teeth of all rhyme and reason. Bacon's note, none are so blind as he that will not see. And Richard III, yet who's so blind as says he sees it not. Sorry. That was from Bacon's Promise. This is specifically from a book called Bacon, Shakespeare Parallelisms. It's amazing. Let's see. In Troilus and Cressida, it says, you do as the chapmen do and dispraise the thing that you desire to buy. And then Bacon makes fun of that concept in his De Augmentis. It is not, says the buyer. You try and discredit it so you can get it for cheaper, of course. And then all's well that ends well, Shakespeare says, what sharp stings are in her mildest words. And then once again in Bacon's De Augmentis, these points and stings of words. And then King Lear, is this the promised end? Bacon's promise, is this the promised end? Okay, same concepts, because they're the same people. And possibly, of course, Edward de Vere, but he died in 1604. Shakespeare 1616 and Bacon 1626. So Bacon is still the oldest, the youngest, so he can, edit all this stuff. Anyway, Bacon says conscience is worth 1,000 witnesses, and then King Richard III says every man's conscience is 1,000 swords, and then my conscience has 1,000 severed tongues, and every tongue brings in a severed tail. And then in Othello, life's but a span. Then an epigram of Bacon, the life of man, less than a span. Same stuff. And this, I'm so silly, one of my favorite Mars Volta songs is called The Empty Vessels Make the Loudest Noise. Okay, and I had no clue that was a Shakespeare quote from Henry V. That's on their album Nocturnicate. An amazing, one of their best songs. Anyway, I totally forgot that was a Shakespearean quote from Henry V. And then in his advice to Rutland, Francis Bacon says, like empty casks, they sound loud when a man knocks upon their outside. It's just that same concept of sounds from empty things. Really cool. And then in Shakespeare's Lucrece, one of his poems, says, time's glory is to unmask falsehood and bring truth to light. That's what time's goal is. And then in Bacon says, in the advancement of learning, The inseparable property of time, which is ever more and more to disclose truth. That's what time's purpose is. And then in his Novum Organum, he says truth is rightly called the daughter of time because it's slowly revealed through time, obviously. Just like finding out Bacon is Shakespeare after all these years. And Bacon in his De Augmentis says nothing but death can reconcile envy to virtue. And then just like in Titus Andronicus, he's standing before the tomb, the grave. Here lurks no treason, here no envy swells. You know, when we die, we don't have to envy anymore. We don't have to envy them anymore. And the concept of Circe in Bacon, he says the worst of Circe's transformations. He mentions that concept. King Henry VI, as if with Circe she would change my shape, changing shape and transformation, you know. Bacon says children are a kind of discipline of humanity. And then Henry VI, it says, you have no children, butchers. If you had, the thought of them would have stirred up remorse, because they are disciplines of humanity, because they're so innocent. And in Coriolanus, custom calls me to it. What custom wills, in all things should we do it. And then Bacon talks about the tyranny of custom and having to, do that. Cool stuff, huh? This book has 800 examples, y'all. It's amazing. One of the best books of all time, in my opinion. It's just straight to the point. Bacon talks about an ill wind that bloweth no man to good. And of course, Shakespeare talks about the ill wind which blows no man to good, right there in King Henry IV, twice. Ill blows the wind. Studies should follow inclinations. That's a good one. Talks about the Pannonians and the Dalmatians, which Bacon also talks about the armies of Pannonian armies. Stage playing. Shakespeare, I love the people, but do not like to stage me to their eyes, because you're young and shy. And Bacon talks about that concept exactly in De Augmentis. Stage playing accustoms young men to bear to be looked at, because we're shy and we want to, hide and stuff. That same exact concept in these two different works. Okay, Bacon talks about the passion of Nero for the lute. King Henry VI, I will, and like thee Nero, play on the lute. They also talk about Scylla, same concept. And this one, Henry VIII, I come not to hear such flattery now and in my presence. And then in Bacon, Advancement of Learning, it is esteemed flattery to play praise in presence. It's that same concept. All right, almost done here, yeah. The Wheel of Fortune. Bacon says, the wheels of his fortune. Shakespeare says, she, Fortune, is painted also with a wheel. Same concept. Both talk about astrology and what they believe having planetary influence on us. They talk about killing tyrants. Bacon says, to make a trial of their opinions, the question was cunningly raised whether the killing of a tyrant was lawful. And then in Julius Caesar, those whom we fight against, this is King Richard, sorry. For what is he they follow? Truly, gentlemen, a bloody tyrant. So that same concept of, is killing a tyrant okay or not? Let's see. Shakespeare says, let all the ends that thou aimest at be thy countries, thy gods, and truths. And Bacon says, the last point, which is of all others the most compendious and summary, and again the most noble and effectual, is the electing and propounding unto a man's self good and virtuous ends of his life. Like your ends and your aims should be virtuous. But at the same time, Measure for Measure says, some by virtue fall. Bacon says that as well. He says, there are seasons, says Tacitus, when great virtues are the surest causes of ruin. Okay, Bacon talks about a kind of eloquence and silence, as does Shakespeare in Taming of the Shrew. Say, she be mute and will not speak a word. They don't commend her volubility, and say, she uttereth piercing eloquence. Her muteness is what makes her eloquent, instead of like being a talking head, This is interesting. Bacon says, it is one method to begin swimming with bladders, which keep you up, and another to begin dancing with heavy shoes, which weigh you down. Well, in Henry VIII, it says, I have ventured like little wanton boys that swim on bladders. And then Romeo and Juliet says, you have dancing shoes with nimble soles. I have a soul of lead. So it stakes me to the ground. Those two exact concepts. That's crazy, y'all. Okay, speech is like a rod. Those two concepts right there. This concept, in The Tempest, Shakespeare says the very rats instinctively have quit it. And Bacon says it is the wisdom of rats that will be sure to leave a house before it falls. It's that same concept of rats knowing when to leave. I mean, what other author even has that concept in that context? It's insane. Tuning of the instruments, they both talk about. Here's a fish hangs in the net, like a poor man's right in the law. Bacon talks about that. There are no worse snares than legal snares. They are as nets in the path. You know, same concept of the law being a net and kind of a trap instead of something to help you. This says, methinks he should stand in fear of fire being burnt in the hand for stealing his sleep. And then Bacon's history of Henry VII talks about the king burning their hand. What's interesting is Shakespeare has King Henry the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth, and then skips the Seventh. There's no Shakespeare Henry VII play. It skips to Henry VIII. Well, Bacon just happens to only write a history of one king, Henry VII. It's almost as if he didn't want to make this into a play. He had to make it into a book, just because of the type of information. Living in fear of death, both men, quote unquote, have definitely talked about that. And then Richard III, it says, seldom comes the better. What does Bacon say in his promise? Seldom cometh the better. Okay, some of these are verbatim, not just the concept, but even the wording. Talking about Cicero and being an orator. Bacon says saying and doing are two things, two separate things. And Othello says this, your word and performance are no kin, meaning they're not the same. As well as Henry VIII mentions that concept. That one's pretty good. Almost done here, y'all. Oil and whales. Like, what author brings up this concept? Well, Shakespeare and Bacon. Bacon says, an immense quantity of oil is extracted from whales in its natural history. Shakespeare, in Merry Wives of Windsor, says this whale was so many tons of oil in his belly. Okay, this is interesting. The first edition of Merry Wives of Windsor, 1602, did not contain the above reference to a whale, nor did the second edition, 1619. The reference made its first appearance in the folio of 1623, at which time Bacon was composing his Natural History. So this concept wasn't even in the first editions. Both talk about Narcissus. That's interesting. Both talk about Caesar wanting to be king. All right, there's two more here, and then one more page, y'all. And as you like it, Shakespeare says, it is as easy to count atoms as to resolve the propositions of a lover, meaning it's hard. And Bacon knew that. An atom, as Democritus himself said, no one ever saw or can see, so it's impossible to count. So that same concept. And in Hamlet, the first editions of 1603, the quartos, it says, doubt that in earth is fire. Okay, he's saying, don't believe there's a molten core in there. And Bacon even believed that right here. He said, with regard to earth, when we had penetrated into the interior and got through the crust and composition, which is found on the surface and next to it, there seems a perpetuity there, like that's supposed to exist in the heavens. So he's saying it is the same and just dirt. However, later on, here's the thing. He evidently agreed with the opinion that the interior of the earth was a mass of molten matter, not fire. This was the view of Aristotle. And this play was printed in 1603 first. In 1604, however, the second edition appeared with the line quoted above omitted. The theory was repudiated by Bacon. It will be seen in the same year. So he took away that concept. So our Hamlet play should not have that line about doubt that in earth is fire, because Bacon took it out in the later editions. It's just in that first folio edition. All right, it's the last page, y'all. Romeo and Juliet talks about misshapen chaos, and Bacon talks about how chaos is without form. Both talk about Cupid, the son of Venus, if Venus or her son, in the Tempest. And lastly, talks about the predominance of the planets. Bacon says, what an idle invention is that each of the planet reigns in turn. Each of the planets, has power over us in their own terms. And of course, in All's Well That Ends Well, that concept is the same. You must needs be born under Mars when he was predominant, because you can't change your fate, Anyway, that's just a few more examples. There's literally 800 of them in this book, and it's just, I'm on board with the De Vere thing, but I think Bacon is just so much more obviously the primary genius. Okay, I mean, he's got the Promise, and he's got all of these parallels, and De Vere has like 3 poems that he published. He doesn't have a quarter of the amount of work that Bacon has, let alone the correspondences and parallelisms. Anyway, y'all mull that over for a bit. Take it easy.